In 1945 Paris, the air still smelled of war smoke and ashes. However, an absurd carnival had already begun in the business world. A bizarre invention called the ballpoint pen appeared on the market. The most famous was the American-made Reynolds rocket. It boasted that it could write underwater. It sold for a staggering $12.50. At that time, this was enough to buy a full week of premium rations. Yet, reality was a disaster full of dark humor. These expensive luxury goods were highly unreliable. They often stopped working at critical moments, like signing major contracts. They also leaked bright blue-black ink into bankers' $50 silk shirts. This was the industry reality 31-year-old Marcel BIC faced. He did not laugh at these leaky, expensive toys like other onlookers. Instead, he stood in a rundown, drafty workshop in the Paris suburb of Clichy. His eyes flashed with a cold, predatory light. He stared intently at this chaotic market. He keenly smelled a $10 billion empire hidden behind cheap ink stains. Marcel BIC was not a French aristocrat born with a silver spoon. He was born in Turin, Italy. He spent his childhood wandering around Europe with his family. This turbulent life etched a deep desire for wealth into his bones. It also gave him a cold understanding of reality. He later earned a law degree. However, he had no interest in courtroom debates. Instead, he loved the smell and roar of industrial machines. Before World War II, he worked as a production manager at an ink company called Stevens. This experience taught him the chemical properties of ink. It also exposed the huge profits and low efficiency of the traditional pen industry. In October 1945, the war had just ended. BIC and his partner Edouard Bouffard scraped together just 10,000 francs. They did not invest in the popular black market. Instead, they bought a half-bombed old factory in Clichy. Amidst the rubble and the pungent smell of machine oil, they started their business. They produced nibs and parts for established pen makers. This parts business was dull and boring. However, it was as stable as a money-printing machine. BIC exercised extreme cost control over the production process. The factory quickly turned a profit. But late at night, BIC sat in his cramped office filled with account books. Listening to trucks passing by outside, his heart was gnawed by an unstoppable ambition. He did not want to be just a parts supplier, counting coins behind the scenes. He wanted to make the rules of the game. That leaky Reynolds rocket became his lever to move the world. BIC bought every ballpoint pen on the market. Under the glaring incandescent light, he dismantled them like an anatomy professor. He used a magnifying glass to carefully observe the tiny metal ball. He soon reached a highly disruptive business conclusion. Everyone was going in the wrong direction. Manufacturers at the time were trying to solve the leaking problem by improving ink formulas. To BIC, this was simply foolish. The core of the ballpoint pen was not a chemistry problem at all. It was an extremely precise physics and metallurgy problem. If the ink was too thin, it leaked. If it was too thick, it clogged. The key lay in the bite precision between the 1mm metal ball and the pen tip's metal base. If the ball's surface had even a 10,000th of a millimeter of unevenness, ink would leak under gravity. The same happened if the base gap was slightly too large. American manufacturers used rough tractor-making techniques for a part that required scalpel-like precision. Failure was inevitable. After grasping this underlying logic, BIC made a crazy decision. It made his partner Bouffard break out in a cold sweat. BIC decided to bet all the company's profits. He also borrowed heavily to buy the world's most expensive and precise Swiss watchmaking lathes. This was not just a huge gamble. It was a death march that pushed the company to the brink. Over the next 2 years, the old Clichy factory became an anxious and frantic lab. BIC practically lived in the workshop. His hands were permanently stained with blue-black ink. His eyes were bloodshot from staying up late and staring at micrometers. Every morning, the piercing sound of machines cutting stainless steel echoed through the factory. BIC demanded that engineers polish the stainless steel balls into perfect spheres. The error margin could not exceed 1,000th of a millimeter. He threw samples on the floor countless times, yelling at his engineers. These pens showed invisible line breaks after writing for 500 meters. Holding a stopwatch and a ruler, he frantically drew circles and straight lines on miles of rough paper to test ink viscosity. He didn't just want a pen that could write, he wanted an industrial miracle. It had to flow perfectly the moment it touched paper, indoors or outdoors, until the last drop of ink was gone. After conquering the fatal technical barriers, BIC hit another massive wall: patents. The invention rights to the ballpoint pen belonged to a Hungarian journalist named Laszlo Biro. Biro was far away in Argentina at the time. He held the patent but lacked business skills and funds. He could not mass-produce this perfect product globally. In the business world, patents without manufacturing capacity and distribution channels are just fragile pieces of paper. But BIC was a shrewd strategist. He knew that forcing his way around the patent would lead to endless international lawsuits that would drag down his fledgling empire. So, a transatlantic psychological game began. BIC did not arrogantly ignore Biro. Instead, he extended an olive branch. He hid the fact that he had already mastered mass production technology. He negotiated with Biro as a sincere European contract manufacturer. Biro was overwhelmed by global patent infringements and a lack of funds. BIC's appearance was a lifesaver. After a long and intense negotiation, BIC bought Biro's European patent rights outright. He paid a massive sum of 2 million francs in cash, winning without a fight. 2 million francs was an astronomical figure back then, but as BIC signed the check, a faint, cold smile appeared on his lips. He knew he was not just buying a patent certificate. He was buying a legal passport to dominate the global market. With legal obstacles cleared, BIC finally launched his ultimate weapon. In late 1950, the pen that would completely change human writing history rolled off the assembly line in Paris. It was named the BIC Cristal. When placed on a desk, it looked incredibly ordinary. It seemed so cheap that people might even despise it. But this was the ultimate expression of BIC's profound business wisdom. Every tiny detail of this pen was the result of strict cost calculations and psychological design. First was the pen barrel. BIC discarded the heavy metal and celluloid of traditional pens. He chose polystyrene plastic, which was just emerging at the time. Why use transparent plastic? It completely eliminated the user's anxiety of not knowing when the ink would run out. It also pushed material costs to the absolute limit. Next was the shape. Why a hexagon instead of a cylinder? It was definitely not just for looks. BIC astutely observed that wooden pencils were mostly hexagonal. This design prevented the pen from rolling off a slanted desk. More importantly, a hexagonal plastic tube saved up to 20% of raw materials compared to a cylindrical one. For BIC, who aimed to produce billions of pens, this 20% cost saving directly turned into suffocating wealth. Finally, there was a nearly invisible tiny hole in the middle of the barrel. BIC's engineers designed it to balance the air pressure inside and outside the tube. This invisible hole completely solved ink leaks caused by altitude changes and temperature fluctuations. The pricing of this pen was BIC's most fatal shot to the heart of the traditional stationery industry. It cost 50 centimes, less than a cheap cup of street coffee. In the face of this price, all traditional business logic about prestige and writing rituals instantly collapsed. BIC redefined the concept of a pen. It was no longer a luxury item kept in a velvet box to be passed down. It was a pure, highly reliable, disposable, industrial consumable. As long as a pen can write perfectly, its mission is over when the ink runs out. You should throw it in the trash without any burden. This was BIC's cold yet highly forward-looking consumerist philosophy. At first, traditional stationery stores sneered at these transparent plastic tubes. They were used to making high profits on single fountain pens. They refused to give prime display space to a 50-centime cheap item. Faced with this channel blockade, BIC showed astonishing destructive power. He completely bypassed the arrogant traditional stationery stores. He turned his attention to street tobacco shops, newsstands, grocery stores, and even train station ticket windows. He sent out a massive team of salesmen. They forced cardboard display boxes full of BIC pens into these humble corners. In an instant, the streets and alleys of France were flooded with these small, transparent sticks. The results were explosive. In the first year, sales were flat due to people's bad impressions of earlier ballpoint pens. But then, buyers experienced its flawless, silky smooth writing for 2 kilometers without stopping. Word of mouth spread like a virus. Soon, daily sales skyrocketed from 10,000 to 100,000, then to 250,000. Every morning, long lines of trucks waited outside the Clichy factory to pick up goods. By the mid-1950s, BIC had completely conquered Europe. But his wolf-like gaze was fixed across the Atlantic. He aimed at the ultimate battlefield flowing with milk and honey, the U.S. market. To carve out a bloody path in the fierce U.S. market, BIC knew building a network from scratch was too slow. He needed a Trojan horse. In 1958, he found the perfect target, the Waterman Pen Company. Waterman had invented the modern capillary fountain pen and ruled the U.S. market for over half a century. Now, it was on the verge of bankruptcy due to rigid systems and a slow response to the ballpoint revolution. BIC acted like a barbarian with lots of cash. For a mere $1 million, he ruthlessly acquired Waterman's Connecticut factory and its entire North American sales network. This acquisition was not just a capital takeover. It was a fierce clash of 2 business cultures. Waterman's American executives wore expensive suits and still dreamed of their old aristocratic glory. When they saw this short man pointing fingers and speaking with a heavy French accent while holding a plastic tube, their eyes filled with arrogance and disdain. They tried to lecture BIC, claiming American consumers only liked heavy, gorgeous products. BIC's response was extremely violent. He directly fired the executives, who refused to change. He mercilessly shut down Waterman's proud but heavily money-losing high-end fountain pen lines. He replaced all the machines in the Connecticut factory with molds for cheap BIC Cristal pens. To break the prejudice of American consumers, BIC launched the most famous and hardcore marketing campaign in U.S. television history. He didn't hire any glamorous celebrities. Instead, he broadcasted a series of nearly insane violence tests on national TV. He strapped a BIC pen to an ice skate and scraped it across the ice. He used a ballpoint pen as a drill bit to pierce a thick wooden board. He even threw it into a fire to roast, then took it out and smoothly wrote a large sentence on paper. Writes first time, every time. This simple, crude, yet visually stunning approach completely destroyed the final psychological defense of the U.S. market. BIC ballpoint pens became a cheap and deadly flood. Flowing through Waterman's existing distribution network, they instantly overwhelmed supermarkets, pharmacies, and office supply stores across America. Marcel BIC won. He not only defeated all the industry giants, but also built his own empire with his bare hands. His wealth code was never about making stunning luxury goods. It was about understanding the underlying consumer psychology of an industrialized society. He provided near-perfect functional reliability at an extremely low marginal cost. He democratized expensive technology and turned disposable into an unquestionable lifestyle. In the following decades, this stubborn Frenchman copied this cold and flawless business logic. He applied it to lighters, BIC Lighter, 1973, and razors, BIC Razor, 1975. Time and time again, he defeated arrogant traditional giants. When Marcel BIC died in Paris in 1994, his transparent plastic stick had sold 100 billion units worldwide. This little stick was originally created just to solve ink leaks. This number of pens is enough to wrap around the earth countless times. When he closed his eyes for the last time, his wealth totem lay quietly everywhere. It was in every office, every school, and on every cluttered desk in the world. Using a 1mm steel ball and 50 centimes of plastic, he earned wealth rivaling a nation. More importantly, he completely bought out the way humanity records the world.